Alright, so for the next couple of videos, we're going to be taking a look at a particular setup for an application that's going to demonstrate how to use the slider control and the text area control. Primarily, we're going to be focusing on getting everything set up for the slider control. The text area is kind of just an add-on to be able to demonstrate the functionality of this particular application. So what I want to do for this one is create a new program, and I'm going to be using this to set the font size of the text inside of a text area. So I'm just going to call this setFontDemo.java. So for this first part, we're going to be taking a look at the slider control. So we'll see how to actually set up a slider, customize its visual appearance, and then in the next video, we'll add some functionality to that slider so that it can actually interact with the text area control that we add. So we're going to have our usual imports. So we're going to have our JavaFX application class. We'll then have our stage and have our scene. Okay. The other thing I'm going to add for this one is an hbox. And the purpose of this hbox is that I'm going to include both a slider as well as a label to provide a name for that slider. So unlike things like, say, the radio button or the checkbox, where you could provide some label, kind of like a handle or a tag that comes with it, the slider doesn't really include something like that. Instead, you'll just have to provide another control that you can associate with the slider to indicate what name you're giving to it. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and import a label. And we're going to import the slider. Okay. Then we'll go ahead and set up the header and body for our class. So this will be a setFontDemo, extends application. We'll have our main method. We'll call the launch method. And then we'll start the start method. So we'll public void start, stage, primary stage. Okay. So the first thing I'm going to do is set up the label that I'm going to associate with the slider. So we're going to have our label. We'll call this font size label, since this is going to be a label that is associated with a slider that deals with the font size of text. So calling it something like font size label, and then also making the slider font size slider. It's a pretty handy way to keep track of what each of these corresponds to. So we'll have our label. So we're going to say font size, we'll have a colon and a space, and then we'll go ahead and make the slider. So we'll call this font size slider. This is going to be equal to a new slider. And then there are a couple of values that I need to put into the slider when I construct it. So the first value is going to essentially be the minimum for this. So the minimum that I want to use for this is going to be 10. So essentially the smallest font size that we'll be able to set it to with this slider will be 10. The second value is going to be the maximum. So for this one, I'll keep the range fairly small and just make the maximum 36. And then the last value is going to be the default value. So we'll set that to 12. And this default value is just whatever value it's going to start off at. Okay. The next thing I'm going to need to do is add in the couple of different properties to customize this. So there are a lot of different methods that we're going to go through for the slider. The first one is going to be to display the tick marks. So by default, we could just keep this at false, and it wouldn't display any of the values at different points on the slider. So I'm going to go ahead and change that so that it's actually set to true. The method I'm going to be using is setShowTickMarks. Set that to true. The next thing is going to be the major tick units. So essentially this is going to be the thing that's actually displayed when we want to show the tick marks, these major units. So we're going to do set major tick units. For this one, I'll just do it for every other unit. So for every second one, so we'll have 10, 12, 14, all the way up to 36. We'll go ahead and display those. The next thing is going to be the minor tick marks. So while the major tick marks will include both the tick itself plus a value, so things like the numbers 10, 12, 14, all the way up to 36, those numbers will be visible. We can also go ahead and make sure that the minor tick marks, the mark itself is visible, even if it doesn't show the number that's associated with it. And to go ahead and set that up, we're going to set our minor tick count to be 1. So this will still display every other tick mark as well. The next one's going to be the set show tick labels. So this is the one that's actually associated with showing the number itself. We'll go ahead and set that to true. The set show tick marks is just to make sure that the, as it would suggest, the tick mark itself is visible. The label is corresponding to the numeric value that we want to make visible as well. We'll also have the snapped ticks method, so we'll have set snapped ticks. We can set this to true to make sure that whenever we're moving the slider, or the adjusting the little handle for the slider, if we set the snapped ticks to be true, that means that anytime that we try to move that handle, it will snap to whatever the closest tick happens to be. Otherwise, if we don't set this to true, it will just kind of smoothly move along the slider. Meaning that then, if we have any values kind of in between these, say like some kind of decimal value, it could be set to those as well. But since this is dealing with font size, I'm just going to set this to be true, since we don't really want it to stop on any of those decimal values. It wouldn't really make sense to try to use that for a font size. And then the last thing we'll go ahead and set is the actual visible width, or the overall length of the slider. And we're going to use the set pref width method to do this. And for this one, I'm going to go ahead and make the width of the slider 300. Okay. So this will make sure that it's definitely long enough to make sure that all of the content, all of these labels and tick marks are all going to be visible and have enough space between them. Okay. The next thing we'll do is create the H box. This will be equal to a new H box. I'll just give it 5 pixels of spacing, and we'll go ahead and put in our font size label and our font size slider. We'll then go ahead and set up our scene. So for right now, the root node of the scene is going to be this H box, and then we'll go ahead and set the stage. So we'll provide it with that scene object. We'll set the title to be set font demo, and then we'll make sure that it's displaying. Okay, so then we'll go ahead and take this and compile it. Should be set major tick unit. Okay. And then we'll go ahead and run it. Okay, so at this point now we can see we've got our label for the font size, we've got our slider with a minimum of 10, a maximum of 36, our default at 12, and then we can also see that, all the tick marks are showing. So we've got these little ticks right here for each point along the slider. We've got the labels, so the 10, 12, 14, 16, all that's displaying. And we can also see that the labels are only displaying for the major ticks. so the even values that we specified, but we also still see ticks for every other value, since we also set the tick count, the minor tick count, to be 1. Okay. So this is going to wrap up the first part for looking at this set fonts demo. In the next video, we'll go ahead and give this slider some functionality, since we'll also be incorporating the text area control into this application.